overflow of information yesterday, and people are still ruminating on what happened, and they are still not here. Can we please file inside the room? May I request that my fellow colleagues, the presenters of today, please come to the fore, so that when we ask the minister to come in, we don't start having all of ourselves. And those will be Ms. Fedoz Bubulia, Charles Stewart, Olelo Akashe Katia. If I can ask them to please come forth and join me, otherwise it's going to be quite lonely on the stage. It is a pity then that a number of seats are still empty, but I'm sure people are on their way to join us again. We will then ask that Minister comes in. If you can just request for Minister to come inside. As we did yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, I request that we stand as a sign of respect when Minister enters the room. I almost said, Minister, they must clap hands as if it's Oscars or BAFTA awards as you come inside. But I think we can do that, colleagues, and welcome our Minister. No, thank you very much, Minister. You may take a seat, and all of us, let's do the same. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll not have any national anthem because we opened, and this is a continuation. And therefore, then we'll proceed with our program as was outlined in your packs and in your programs. But before that, allow me to welcome our Honorable Minister, Minister Nadim Tetwa, for having joined us. We really appreciate, Minister, the interest and the drive and the inspiration that you are providing to us in this area. You have done this in the music sector. You have done this even with the Mpakanga group. You have moved and engaged with the literary community. I think the film is one of those, as you indicated yesterday, that in line with our BRICS commitment and why can South Africa make the greatest impact, you did not have a hesitation that the film and animation should be the thing that we must focus on as South Africa and be able to cut our niche among the nations of the world. And I think your presence here, despite cabinet taking place, to excuse yourself from such an important meeting really is quite humbling and makes us recommit ourselves to make sure that this sector really becomes a game changer for both transformation and economic growth in this country. So, welcome, Minister. And our program, ladies and gentlemen, is as follows, so that we're just all on the same page. We will just give you a brief overview of what transpired yesterday as a summation. And then thereafter, we will have the panelists, the presenters and the panelists who will come forth. We just have 2 presentations, it's not a lot of them. We will then break for our tea and commissions and to make sure that we will outline what we want from the commissions so that at the end of the day, we do get the outcomes we have set for ourselves. So the overview will be as follows, and I hope that we are ready on our screens. But yesterday was a day in which the sector came together and made sure that we really craft our ideas around how, in line with the theme, we are able to set this particular sector of the film industry in South Africa on its trajectory of growth, but also the trajectory of making sure that South Africa benefits from all of its people and we have an inclusive approach in this industry. We also then acknowledged yesterday the role that has to be played by the young people who requires opportunities to be made available for them to play the rightful place, because as a mandate of arts and culture, colleagues, is that preservation is critical. If you don't hand over the baton, then you will have a problem for generations to come. We further acknowledged that there is in-depth experience and knowledge of this sector. South Africa has a capacity to play its rightful place, rightful role, and take its rightful place. We said we cannot be following instead of being trendsetters. We follow Hollywood, we follow Bollywood. We say we want our own Sollywood or Mzansiwood. What we want to call it is up to us. But with the talent that we have, the knowledge and the experiences that just in this room alone, we can take the world by storm using this particular sector, film industry in South Africa. Therefore, we remind ourselves then of the objectives and the tasks that were put before us by the minister in her speech yesterday. He had indicated that the commitment is to have this as an annual summit, that BRICS countries' partnership is critical, particularly in this area, and that we even committed to a co-production treaty issue. But it's you, when that platform is made available, that you should take advantage of it. He also emphasized the issue of the market access, looking at the billions of people that are in India, in China, and millions in Russia, and emphasized we are a small part of this BRICS, only about 56 million. But that the market access that can be used and exploited there can really revolutionize this industry and this sector. So his challenge to us then was, we must make sure that we take our place seriously in BRICS, utilizing this sector as a springboard. He then emphasized the issue of looking at funding models. If, ladies and gentlemen, you look at the fourth industrial revolution, you will realize that UK, Russia, and Germany, when they talk about digital motion pictures, and then they focus on the film industry 4.0, that the funding model is a very collaborative model. It's government, it's the private sector, it's the industry itself. When you analyze just what is their approach since we are confronted by film industry 4.0. So it is important that that funding model and methods are not only government. So he emphasized that issue. The Deputy Minister spoke about transformation issues in the film industry, and there have been a constant call for mainstreaming the role of women, but also their security and eliminate gender-based violence that women experience in this industry. But also the youth, that how do we make opportunities available? Now in our storyline, one of the key things that we are talking about here is how do we use film industry to tell South Africa's authentic storyline? One of the basic principles South Africa has, fortunately, is the philosophy of Ubuntu. How can this permeate through our film industry in the films, documentaries, television series that we project? So yesterday, Minister, during the commissions, one of the issues was this approach you have of intergenerational mix must be in such a way that there is no attempt to exclude, but the idea must be inclusivity at all levels. And that to do that, if you look at the philosophy of Ubuntu, it calls about respect as you share knowledge and best practices. So when we engage, the issue is that you move away from us and them, you move away from I, for this industry to move in one direction is not what I want, but what should be in the best interest of South Africa, leveraging on this film industry. So if you look at just that philosophy of Ubuntu and how is it reflected in the content of film, would be critical. Professor Marwala spoke and encouraged us around the issues of own stories and adapting technology for the South African context. In here, he emphasized also the use of the indigenous languages. And this year, we are saying government have declared this year as a year of indigenous languages. Music industry plays the same. They are beginning to really, you know, when they do this rap and whatever, I don't know about question, they start using their own what? Indigenous languages. You know, they no longer just sing Luther Vandross, you know. Okay, I'm not disclosing my age, but I just mean they don't do that. Now, how can the film industry, a minister spoke about the short guys, remember in Nigeria? They're not telling the story about Russia. They're not telling the story about South Africa. They are telling the story about how Nigerians live. So why can't we do that as South Africans using this film industry sector? You know, Minister always loved those. I'm not sure how much time he has watching those young, those short boys there, because he always, oh, they are old, they're men. Oh, you see, I've never checked their age, but or their fathers. So whenever Minister makes this example, it's amazing what you can tell about the lives of our people in Limpopo, the life of our people in Northwest, Mahikeng. You know, we have enormous opportunity in this sector. Why are we not exploiting it to that level? But also there were financial commitments that were made yesterday, and we want to say we must hold each other to them, isn't it? There can't be a commitment that does not translate into practical implementation and investment. And that included how do we fight the triple challenge of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Because that's the agenda of government. And I think the president has been talking around growing South Africa together, moving this country forward. So the question is, this industry has that opportunity to contribute. Commissions then, I said I will not talk much of community, of this, but the young people who were here, the two ladies, when they spoke about how they have, using their innovation and adventurous ideas, and did not have to wait for government. They took step and they say, we can do it. The question is then, how do we support them? So we want to challenge every young person. Uzoyithola kanjani uhleli kuphi? Uzoyithola kanjani njani? Uhleli khoneni. In other words, you can get nothing if you do not take first steps. So the young people who came here, with that cry of transformation and everything else, but they were saying, I took first steps. So that was the message, and then they said, give us the opportunity. So at this moment, the commissions, because they need to present their reports, and I thought that, Minister, I will try to report on their behalf, but I think it will be usurping authority I don't have, because they have not given me that mandate. But it was just to highlight key issues here, commissions talking about the Copyright Amendment Bill and what they have committed. But we will not yet give that feedback. But the commissions, Minister, to report to you, they sat here until, some of them until 5:15. We had to tell them, you have to go, because we want you back tomorrow. And it was, that passion was quite amazing, Minister, that we didn't even have to tell people, go back. It's now, people were not mingling and milling around. Instead, they went back and just knuckled down to make sure that this summit really gives us results. And I think we must give yourselves a really big round of applause, colleagues, for it. We really appreciated it. And then, of course, even during tea time, this thing of people taking too long, and I hope you will behave in the same manner. The facilitators, Minister, were quite amazing yesterday. They were able to stick to the rules, and they were able to make sure that people express themselves, but at the same time, come with solutions. So we remain solution-orientated, and that is what Minister said we must do. We must keep focus that this is not a talk show. So that is what happened, and the commissions will then go and further do their work, just to make sure that at the end of the day, we get the results we want. We will still, some of us, move around, but let's make sure that there are questions in your programs. I hope you saw them. That is the point I was told I must communicate. Facilitators, make sure that those questions for each commission are answered. Then you can have all other discussions. Do we agree? Did you see those questions? You don't seem to be sure. Just go to the beginning. Under each commission, there are about 5 to 6 questions you must answer. Ne? So when a facilitator starts somewhere else, remind the facilitator also. Ne? That no, we've got questions to answer. Once those questions are answered, then have further discussions. That is the emphasis. If you come back and report in the afternoon, and you've not answered those questions, that commission, during my time when we were used to this commission, you will go back and redo it. Because you would not have done what you were supposed to do. So look at those questions, answer them in your commissions, then add anything else that can assist us to come up with a clear program of action. Before I call upon the facilitator to take over, Minister, can I put you on the spot? I'm not sure whether for this morning you've got any message for us. I know that you are here to make sure that we have you and we get more inspired, and that you will be closing the session for us. But I just think that we do need your inspiration, even if it's one sentence. But can I have just that authority to instruct the minister? It doesn't happen very frequently. So, Minister, you are requested to just any message you would like to have with us before we get down to business.
This is hijack. No, thanks, DG, and good morning, everyone. Dumelang. Yenda. Abshe. Molweni. No, for me, it's just a Dumelang session. Thank you.
Okay, Dumelang. Yeah. No, we will then, can I please ask Usiswami, we've been working very hard to make sure that at the end of the day we have this session. I no longer have a role to co-pilot. I just have to hand over to Ms. Ferodosa Bubale to take over the program. Over to you.
Thank you. Dumelang. It's just a greeting session. Good morning, everybody. How are you feeling? Woo, everybody's like down. Come on, how are we feeling? It's happening. The Film Summit is here. We've had so much of energy and excitement and discussion. And the youth, hello, come on, youth. The youth have challenged us so much. So we're so happy. And they're going to show us things. They're going to prove that they can do it, right? Minister, I was saying to people, stop calling me mama, right? I've been just like them, the young lion. We all roared, like you. So we are all part, we might be in different generations, but we are part of that same animal, the lion, and the other animal, South Africa. So we are here together. I was going to put Mamsipati on the spot because she had something interesting to say, but I'm going to give you a moment because these two people are going to present and they're so desperate because they're so scared. Corporate South Africa. I said to them, we're with creatives. We're going to have a good time. Just keep to your time, though, because artists, we know the time, right? So I want you just, we said inspiration. I'd like to just say something so you remember this. This is something we did in 1995 when we drew up this African Charter on Children's Broadcasting. And we said children should hear, see, and express themselves, their languages, and their life's experiences through the electronic media that reaffirms their sense of self, community, and place. And I say to people, I know this by heart because it is in me. It is what we do. It's what we do every day. And unfortunately, people who work in the sector don't even know that there are guidelines around production and broadcasting for young people. And if this was said 25 years ago, and we sit here today 25 years later, and the youth say to me, Mama, that's the first time I heard this, that is a problem. That means we have not passed the baton on. That means we have not created the spaces for each of us, each one, to teach one. And I think this is really important as we stand here today, or we sit here today, that we remember that. Because the young people in this room do need to take the baton, but they need to have the experience, the enthusiasm, the information, the education to be able to do that. So it's fine to kick down the doors, I say to them, but be informed when you do that. So when you kick me out of the way, you know more than what I know, and that's why I give you space. But if you know less than what I know, it's not yet time to kick down the door. Please. So we are with you. We want to walk with you, as we did with the opening of the two wonderful young brave women who stood here and spoke on our behalf. And we held their hands as we did that, because we're not going to drop you in the deep end and expect you to do this yourself. We're not going to just suddenly move. We are here to climb that ladder together. So please remember that, those of us who are still here holding that hand for the last 25 years, we will continue to do so. But also remember that we are with you. We're not against you. We are part of you. And as a sector, we are here for each other to make sure that the summit takes us to the next level and that we can say, 5 years ago we were here, now we are there. We have seen the movement because somehow we feel like we're stuck somewhere and we really want to move. I also want to remind us that the ANC manifesto has come up in the manifesto around innovation and the fourth revolution. So look at that manifesto and challenge government. It's written up. We don't have to rewrite it. It is there. Let's look at what is there and put it in the recommendations because government has also interrogated these issues that we as the sector need to interrogate. This is really important. So may I now take the opportunity to invite Charles Stewart, who's going to give us some highlights of what is happening in the sector in terms of real stats. And that will also take out some of that blah, blah, because we imagine things that are not really true. Now we'll have the truth.
All right, I'm just going to... Fantastic. Firdaus, thank you very much for that introduction. Hopefully the truth will be entertaining. But the Honourable Minister Mthethwa and the DG, thank you very much for the invitation. It's wonderful to see a full room here. I don't know if we can get the presentation up. There we go. Fantastic. So my name is Charles Stewart. I'm a director at PwC and really passionate about the entertainment and media industry. Every year we put out something called the Entertainment and Media Outlook, which looks at trends affecting various elements within the entertainment and media industry. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, what the Entertainment and Media Outlook covers is it covers consumer and advertising spend across 14 segments, which you can see on the screen behind me here, across 5 countries. So we do have a bit of an African perspective to it. So South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and Tanzania. And we have 5 years historic and 5-year forecast information. So when I'm talking about historic information this morning, we're talking about 2013 through till 2017. And when I talk about forecast information, 2018 through till 2022. The Outlook is available on our website. I think it's hidden down at the bottom there, but there is a website address at the end. So please sit back and relax. Don't worry about taking pictures and things. Everything that you see is in that publication. All right. So if we get cracking, if we go to the next trend, or to the next slide, please. What are we sort of living in at the moment, right? We are living in this converged world, and what's trending right now? If we go to the next slide there, please, Lebone. We're seeing 3 things trending at the moment: convergence, connections, and trust. We spoke about Can we
ask you to hold the mic in your hand?
Shall I hold it?
Move away?
Okay,
Yeah, this.
fantastic. Shall I just take that out? That would be fantastic because we've lost our screen here as well. And I feel a bit more free now, which is fantastic. Okay, great. All right, that is fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. All right. So we're seeing 3 things trending at the moment: convergence, connections, and trust. When we talk about convergence, and we've called it Convergence 3.0, we're really talking about this blurring between content, technology, telecommunications. And what we're seeing is that increasingly we've got companies that are wanting to create this all-inclusive direct-to-consumer relationship. All right, so if we think about some of the big players, a Facebook, a Google, a Tencent, they are trying to capture every single touch point with you as a consumer. Right? They started off maybe as a social media platform. They now have e-commerce platforms. They have mobile money. They have video content. They really are trying to capture as much of you and as much as your share of wallet as they possibly can. Connections is realizing, and we've heard a lot about collaboration, in the opening remarks, which were really interesting to sum up yesterday's discussions. Connections is realizing that in the current world, in this migrated digital world that we live in, it's about collaborating. It's about leveraging your relationships with your users, stakeholders, and partners to be able to generate those new revenue streams that we're all in desperate need of. And then lastly, trust is the growing power of technology, the rising importance of data, is thrusting trust into an even more central position. And what we're seeing in our research is that companies that are able to engender and sustain trust with regard to content privacy will actually end up with a competitive advantage over their competitors. If we go to the next slide, please. So where are we seeing this convergence? We're seeing it in 4 places. We're seeing media convergence, we're seeing business model convergence, we're seeing access convergence, and we're seeing geographical convergence. By media convergence, there's really this blurring of lines between media. So if we think about your investigative journalistic piece in the past, it was typically something that appeared in print. Now we're seeing audio files, video content, as well as print in that space. We are seeing your producers and your distributors collaborating in ways that we've never seen in the past. And then also we're seeing the competitors and the people playing in various spaces really transcending competitors. So in the past, if we think about something like soccer league rights, they were really the exclusive domain of your traditional broadcasters and your pay TV broadcasters. We're now seeing, over in the US, for example, we've seen Twitter acquire rights to live stream Thursday night NFL football. We've seen BT as a telecommunications company acquiring rights to the English Premier League. So it's no longer, the space of your traditional broadcaster, and that's one of the convergences that we are seeing. Secondly, access. I'll keep this very short. Consumers don't care how they get it, they just want it. So to try and, distinguish between wired and wireless, satellite, broadband, really doesn't matter, right? It's just about getting that content to the consumer. From a business model convergence perspective, if we think about, and this is easiest to explain through an example, if we think about Netflix, Amazon, and Disney, if we think about where they started life, so Disney was a content factory, Amazon, an internet retailer, Netflix, a DVD rental by mail company. That's how it started out. If we think about them now, they're all simultaneously content producers, distributors, and retailers. So that's this business model convergence that we're seeing as well. And then lastly, geographical convergence, and I think this touches on some of the points that were mentioned earlier around the fact that the content and things that we create here has the ability to transcend borders in a very real and very fast manner these days. So if we think about Netflix, Netflix launched in over 100 countries simultaneously a couple of years ago, right? And this is what the digital environment allows content producers and distributors access to. If we go to the next slide, please. The other element which I just want to touch on is trust. And we've touched on this a little bit in the opening comments as well. So I said, trust is becoming a key differentiator, and there are 5 elements that we're seeing, and I'll just sort of, skim over them in the interest of time, because I'm a bit scared about Firdous here, just to make sure that I keep on my time. As entertainment and media players, we need to make sure that, one, our content is trustworthy, right? People want to know that when they share content or advertisers share, advertisements, they want to know that it's appearing alongside trustworthy content. They want to also know that your audiences are what they say they are, which in a digital space is not always that easy, right? We've got pretty good audience measurement in the traditional space. The digital space can be a little more tricky. There's also this overarching element to the fact that once you're involved as a broadcaster, as a social media platform, we've seen the reach and influence that these various platforms can have. And increasingly, users are wanting to know that what you're doing is ultimately in the greater societal good. And we've seen a lot of movements, in terms of, societal change that is driven through these broadcast platforms. So that's the element of trust. And I say, if you can get that right, it can actually emerge as a differentiator, and also keeping, users' data private and confidential is also becoming increasingly important. If we go to the next slide, please, and the next one. So now that we're in this converged world, we've got a bit of a context. Let's get down into some of the facts that Firdous spoke about earlier. So on this slide, what we've got here is we've got the 5 territories that we cover within our entertainment and media outlook. At the bottom of the slide, and it's not that easy to see on the screen, but you can see on the side screens, we've got mobile internet penetration at 2017 and at 2022. And then we've got the size of the market. So if I speak through South Africa, for example, currently within South Africa 2017, we've got mobile internet penetration of around 58% in the market. That's forecast to grow to 75% in 2022. And our market is forecast to grow at 6.5%, and in 2022 will be worth around 177 billion rand. Okay? And there's a very strong correlation, which we'll see when we look at Nigeria, for example. So Nigeria currently sitting at 20% mobile internet penetration. It's going to grow to 41%, so more than double, and its overall market growth sitting at 21.5%, which will see that market reach 9.9 billion. So the message within Africa, the story within Africa is a strongly mobile one, and there's a very strong correlation between growth in mobile internet penetration and the overall growth within the market. If we go to the next slide, please. So a lot of that growth in the African market is also coming from this internet access. And what we do every year is we take the various countries, and we've lost the names, okay? But, okay, we've lost the names on the presentation here. What we did on the slide, I'll explain it to you, is we plot the various countries in our entertainment and media outlook across the 54 global ones. And we then look at, if we move the internet access spend, right, what is left in terms of pure entertainment and media spend? So Nigeria goes from that 21.5% growth through to 2022, it drops down to 7.9%. So a lot of the growth that's happening within Nigeria and with many of the African countries is happening in the internet access space. And that, I think, is important for us as entertainment and media practitioners to realize, because it means that there is potentially less money available for the actual payment of the content. And we have a degree of maturity and development that needs to happen in particularly our African markets, because there is this sense that once I've paid for the access to content, I don't necessarily need to pay for the content itself. And for people who produce that content, that's a great challenge. Some of that comes from necessity as well, right? So it's not just a case of people saying, I enjoy pirated, I enjoy pirated material. For a lot of people, the access is as much as they can afford from a disposable income perspective, right? So there's that element as well. So as that access becomes cheaper and cheaper, hopefully it starts to free up more money to spend on the content itself, okay? But certainly that is a challenge. And, we see within our developing markets within Africa, a lot more of the actual spend happens on gaining access as opposed to, on the actual content spend itself. So that's one of the challenges. If we go to the next slide, please. What's interesting as well, when you have these 54 countries that we cover in our global entertainment and media outlook, is you can actually start to compare across segments and between countries. And there are just two that I'd like to, touch on here that show some of the divergences. The first is music. So music was very interesting. We reached a very interesting point in 2017 last year. It was the first segment that had a digital element, which was forecast to show declining growth. All right? And you can see on the slide there, it's digital downloads. Okay, now if I spoke to you a few years back, a lot of you would probably have been downloading individual, digital tracks. Right? How many of you are still downloading, or have you moved across to streaming? All those who've moved across to streaming, please raise your hands. All right? Why did we move across to streaming? It's a better business model. Plain and simple. All right? Much larger variety. All right? Cheaper cost in terms of what you can actually get. All right? And the interesting message out of this is that a lot of people, when we moved with this digital migration to start, a lot of people thought, well, if I have a digital offering, that's my silver lining. Everything will be okay because I'm in the digital economy. It's not that simple, all right? Once you have a digital offering, one needs to make sure that it's still responding to consumer needs at the end of the day. The second element here is around box office. 2017 was a pretty tough year globally from a box office perspective. And we see we've got some very mature markets, Australia, the US, France, all in decline. South Africa managed to eke out some growth. China, 22%. Everybody's watching movies in China, all right? And that was obviously driving, the overall one. So I suppose that from a BRICS perspective is quite good, because there's also going to need to be, potential content into that market and things like that. But it begged the question from our side to say, are we into a bit of a declining, sector? And the feeling is no. 2017 just wasn't a great year from a box office release perspective, right? And really, in 2018, we saw, the Black Panther effect. We've seen Infinity Wars. We've seen a number of, those big Hollywood blockbusters, which drive a lot of the, markets. But within South African context as well, we need to figure out how we try to, become slightly more immune to some of those global shocks as well, in terms of how we really develop, this vibrant local film sector as well. Okay, so that's a bit of the global context. If we go on to, if we can go forward in another slide as well. If we get into the South African market now, okay, and we've lost a little bit of the formatting on the slides here as well, but that's fine. We'll chat through it. In 2017, our overall market experienced a pretty low year-on-year growth, all right? 6.8%, which saw it reach 129 billion rand. And it was a pretty tough year from both the macroeconomic and political perspective. Going forward, we expect the market to grow at 6.5%, which will see the market reach 177 billion rand in 2022. If we go to the next slide, where is that growth coming from? The short answer is digital. So of the 48 billion that's going to be added over the forecast period, 41.3 billion of that is going to come in the digital space. And that's being driven primarily by internet access, internet advertising, and then the digital elements primarily of TV, music, and video games, interestingly. I've highlighted just a couple here. So traditional TV and video still showing solid growth, and I'll get back to that in a little bit more detail. And obviously, internet access, is still commanding the majority of the spend within the overall, or the biggest segment within the overall market. If we go forward to the next slide, please. LeBon, if we can go through to the next slide there, please. Oh, there we go. So when I think about the outlook, for me, the outlook is around tipping points. And the first tipping point that we've got is in 2017, data consumption via smartphones overtook data consumption via fixed broadband. And I think, a few of us will deny that this is the first thing that we look at in the morning, hopefully after giving your significant other a hug. But it's probably the first thing we look at in the morning. It's probably the last thing that we look at night. And for many people, and particularly within Africa, this is both a personal computer, it's an entertainment and media consumption device, it's a communication device. This is it, all right? Many people do not have, the ability or the luxury of having multiple devices on which to consume media. So that was the first one. And what's driving that increased data via smartphones? Well, it's smartphone penetration. So if we look at the next slide, what we see is that smartphone connections in South Africa are currently sitting at 43 million. That's going to double. 2022, 86 million smartphone connections. Also, connectivity is improving. So currently, around 63% of our connections are 3G or higher. Okay, occasionally we get to that point where it drops down to edge, or that other thing, all right, where you can't get any data and you get really frustrated, all right. By 2022, 90% are going to be 3G or higher, and 30% are going to be 4G or higher. And that increase in connectivity, next slide please, as well as the smartphone penetration, is leading us to a very significant tipping point. In 2020, overall digital spend within the market is going to overtake non-digital spend for the first time. Okay, and that's been driven obviously by this increased connectivity and increased penetration, and that's driving the uptake of digital services. And this becomes a bit of a virtuous circle, because as more and more people start to consume the digital products, so more people put digital products into that market, into that marketplace, and as that happens, more and more people go online, and the whole circle just continues to drive itself. If we go to the next slide, please. So this just really, illustrates from a non-digital perspective, we've got five segments, and on the left-hand side, they're books, out-of-home, magazines, newspapers, and video games. Those are segments in which the non-digital elements will show decline over the forecast period. In contrast, we've got 9 segments, the digital elements of which are going to show double-digit growth over the forecast period. So this just gives you a sense as to where that 48 billion and the 41.3 billion of digital growth is coming from. On to the next slide, please. Music I want to touch on because it's an interesting segment. I've got three slides just to finish here quickly. So we're going to touch on music, we're going to look at cinema, and we're going to look at TV. Now, music's an interesting one for me, right? So one, we said it had that declining digital downloads. Secondly, so we saw music streaming overtake digital downloads in 2017. Physical music has been one of the segments that has been hardest hit. So the size of the music market, the physical recorded music market in 2013, by 2022, there's going to be only 5% left, all right? So it's very important to understand what your trend looks like in terms of your traditional revenue streams, all right? That's not the same for all segments. Music's been particularly hard hit. The interesting thing about music for me, which draws a parallel to cinema, is the largest revenue growth in terms of rands and cents. So streaming is growing fastest, but the largest growth in terms of actual rands and cents is coming from live music events. So we're talking about festivals, we're talking about concerts. And what this tells me, which is really interesting for consumers, is that they're still willing to pay for a great live experience, right? We thought, oh, is social media going to affect that a few years back? Hasn't. If anything, it's enhanced it, right? Because now you're adding this extra element to that live music experience. And we see a similar scenario in cinema. So even in the big sort of global declines in terms of, the various recessions we've had around the world, cinema and box office has continued to show some growth in that space. All right, if we go to the next slide, please. So looking at the overall cinema market, we just need to have some, there we go. Okay, so from an overall cinema perspective, the market is going to grow at around 3.9%. 3.5% of that growth over the forecast period is coming from box office, and then advertising is quite big within the cinema space as well. We're going to see an increase. People and the various exhibitors are still investing right? So we see the number of screens are increasing from around 780 up to around 830. That's the forecast over the, over the next 5 years. And that's servicing our population. I think the DG mentioned it, around 56 million. To give you a sense of the opportunity in, in underdeveloped markets, Nigeria has a population of almost 200 million, and I think there are 114 cinema screens in Nigeria, right, in terms of the formal cinema market. There's a big informal, film viewing culture within Nigeria as well. And I think the other element which is noteworthy of mention within the cinema space is obviously the film dividend in terms of the knock-on effect, and the economic multipliers that the film industry has. Now, I also want to mention what we've seen coming out now recently is the amount of investment that, Apple are talking about it, Netflix are talking about it, Amazon Prime are talking about it. We're talking about billions of dollars, right? So they've announced over $12 billion worth of investment in content this year. So that's a great place, right, in terms of who's going to be producing that content. So as content producers, I think that's quite an exciting message. And your OTT, your streamers, are increasingly realize that they need to compete on that content, on that content side as well, right? They need to be, in line with what's happening in terms of your traditional broadcasters, in terms of your traditional, content producers, and even with the film industry. So there's a little bit of competition there as well, but it's a good message from a content production perspective. And then lastly, on the TV space, on the next slide, we see that the TV market's still experiencing good growth as well. So 4.8%. And going to see the TV market reach almost 41 billion rand in 2022. Most of that spend is happening still in the, in the pay TV space, right? And that's still expected to grow. I think we haven't yet got to the point that your streaming services and the affordability of data allow, that pay TV to actually be replaced with a streaming service that offers the same, quality of content and diversity of content. So we still see growth in that space. The interesting tipping point coming out of the TV chapter is around TV advertising. So TV advertising forecast to grow 3.8%, which will see it reach 9 billion rand in 2022. And if we go to the next slide, the very fast growth in internet advertising, which we're forecasting to grow 13%, we'll see internet advertising overtake TV advertising as the biggest advertising segment in 2022. So that's quite a big shift. And this was a shift that was noted globally back in 2016. So we do follow, global trends. We just sometimes, some of them were ahead. But, particularly within the TV and the internet space, there has been this 5 or 6 year lag. But, that's a big shift for us as well. So what does this all mean, right? For companies to succeed in this space, it is going to be really 5 critical success factors. 1, it's about having access to the right technology. 2, excellent content. 3, delivered in a cost-effective way, which increasingly means mobile, particularly in Africa. 4, to an engaged audience. And lastly, to someone who trusts the brand. If companies can get that right, and if the industry can get that right, the growth opportunities are still significant. So with that, thank you very much.
I was going to say 0 minutes left. Could you just keep up your name and where you're from?
So my name again, for those just asked me, Charles Stewart from PwC.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Madam, may I call you? You're going to introduce yourself so I don't take any more of your seconds.
Thank you. My name is Gloria Lakasha Gadia. I'm from Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, otherwise known as MISTRA. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Ms. Minister, and thank you, DG. What I'm going to be presenting is slightly different from what my colleague here presented. I'm going to be presenting the Indlulamiti scenarios 2030. Now, as we all know, that South Africa is going through the most uncertain phase since the apartheid period or apartheid era. So at the height of this, around 2017, when things were quite volatile and we saw many South Africans going out onto the streets to protest and demanding many different things. There was the Fallist movement and everything was falling then. Many leaders of different sectors from civil society, labor movement, business, they all got together concerned about where we were going as a country. And from that, there was a decision that maybe we need to come up with a strategy to find solutions or to try and imagine a different future for our country. And from those conversations, we resolved that we would actually take the scenarios approach. And this is because South Africa is not new to scenarios. Our transition in 1994 was informed by scenarios building process. Those were the Mount Fleur scenarios, and those were followed by 2 presidential scenarios, with the last one being in 2008. We also had the Dinokeng scenarios. So we felt that, well, to deal with the uncertainty that we are still facing and still trying to deal with, then that is the best approach. We chose the giraffe as our totem, and that's where we get our name from, Indlulamiti. The reason why we chose the giraffe and called ourselves Indlulamiti is because Indlulamiti is a Nguni term for a giraffe, and the literal translation is looking above the trees. And what we're trying to drive here is that we're trying to look above the current uncertainty and the current volatility and all the things that we are not sure about, especially in this year as we are approaching the national elections. We also settled on year 2030 because the only blueprint that we have currently in the country is the National Development Plan that has a horizon that's set at 2030. Now we know that the NDP is highly contested. We have the unions that are still not buying into the NDP. However, while this might be disrupted by the shifting political landscape, we also understand that South Africa is committed to sustainable development goals, which is the SDGs, that's the United Nations Developmental Agenda. It also has a horizon that is set at year 2030. So we agreed that 2030 is the best year to select as our horizon. And this is because, you know, this country is not accustomed to long-term planning. Every new minister comes with a new plan. Every new president comes with a new plan. By the time you're about to implement that plan, a new regime takes over and we start planning. Before we can implement, the next regime takes over. So we thought, well, this is the most secure time frame that we can use. So even if this political landscape changes, we still are committed to the United Nations development goals that we are assigned to. So this is the background to this, if you're asking why 2030. And also why Indlulamiti is because we are trying to look above this current uncertainty. We can go on to the next slide. Now, at the beginning of the process, we had to come up with the question, what we call the key question. That's what we do in scenarios building processes. What is the question that we're trying to answer? And we settled at what would a socially cohesive South Africa look like, and to what degree is it attainable by 2030? Now, others have asked, like especially those who come from the private sector, why social cohesion? Because we're concerned about economic growth. There were the labor unions who were concerned about jobs, and many different stakeholders were concerned about different things. But what we found in those debates, that the common thread was the lack of social cohesion. We were all debating from positions that are in opposition with each other, and this is something that's quite endemic in South Africa. So we thought this is the best question we should be asking, and the process then unfolded to ask those questions. We developed questionnaires and so on. We can go on to the next slide. Now, just as a disclaimer, our definition of social cohesion is about integration, it's about inclusion, it's about participation, it's about solidarity, collaboration, finding a sense of shared values or a sense of nationhood. It's about equality, it's about justice, but it's not about us hugging on the streets after the 2010 World Cup. And it's certainly not about assimilation, and it's not about avoiding difficult conversations, because that's something that we seem to agree on in this country, that there's certain conversations that we will not discuss. We have so many holy cows. So that is our point of departure, and it is certainly not about getting along. We can go on to the next slide. Now, this process was led by Dr. Fikeni, whom we all know as a political analyst. He's the face of the project. And we worked with many diverse stakeholders. Others gave us financial support. As you can see, there's some mining companies. We ourselves, Mapungubwe, is leading the research process. We had the banking sector, Nedbank, giving us banking facilities. Many of them gave us in-kind support by way of venues and so on. We can go on to the next slide. Now, we had various teams Now, starting with the leadership group, those sort of like our board, they act as a sounding board. At each stage, we consult with those people. These are the people who helped us formulate the key question. These are the people who also helped us to identify the relevant people we should be speaking to. So those are some of the notable names there, and some of them might be familiar to yourselves. We also have a steering committee where I sit and we do the day-to-day, we run the day-to-day operations of the project, which is still continuing since that day in June 2017, when we decided that something must be done. We also have a set of core participants. Now, these are people who were informants. They were selected because they are experts in their various industries. They are thought leaders. They also nominated or recommended by the leadership group and some of our sponsors. And as we went along, we also have been bringing other people on board. Next slide. Now, in terms of the methodology that we decided to adopt to build the scenarios, we adopted the intuitive logic school, which combines intuition, so it's gut feel. So if you are in the film sector, there are certain things that you know. You've got a gut feel about them in terms of what's going to happen in the next 20 years or so. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. So we're not trying to predict, but we're exploring those intuitions. But then once we gather the first set of information, then we back that up with rigorous research. And that's why the name intuitive logic. So the logic comes from the research component of our approach. The reason why we did this creative process in terms of intuition is to try to get people to not limit themselves to what they know about the present, to try to be as creative as possible, to use your wildest imagination. We can go on to the next slide. Now, in terms of the initial findings that we gathered from what we called the core participants, we made sure that those core participants resemble the national demographic, because the first time we went and selected people we were going to interview, because remember, they're supposed to be leaders of industry and so on. But when we came back, we found that they were all over 50, white, and male. So we had to go back to the drawing board and make sure that we pay attention to the national demographic. We managed to secure some focus group discussions with some unemployed youth, which is something that is quite unique in terms of research processes. We also created an online platform because we understood that for young people, it's difficult to have young people in platforms such as this one, because this is a very elitist platform and there's no access. So we had to create this online platform that operates like Twitter or Facebook, if you like. So we gathered that information, the first set of data, we called that the first draft variables. And we then went on to distill that information, and we looked at areas that were not quite well understood in the country. And surprisingly enough, I'll just like speak to the issue of human trafficking. That came from the unemployed youth. And imagine if we had not spoken to them. And of course, this is a great concern for them because they are job seekers who are most vulnerable to human trafficking. And no one is looking at that in the country, but it is something. We keep seeing posts on social media, but it's something that needs to be explored. So there were many other areas. As you can see, what concerns us today, the fourth industrial revolution. It came out strongly, but it's something, it's an area that we have not really paid attention to as a country. The impact of labor laws, and so on. We can go on to the next slide. Now, that whole research process then, while we were doing it, we also had to be mindful of the global trends. Again, fourth industrial revolution is a global trend. That's something that is a given. So it's one of the foundations or building blocks of our findings. Climate change, inequality, even though as a country we are the most unequal in the world. We also had some local trends that we had to be paying attention to, issues of in-migration into our country, and so on. Next slide, please. Now, this is what the process that we took, the research process, gathering information, and that led us to what we call the variables. Now, those who are familiar with scenarios building processes, you would know that variables are hypotheses, really, about the future. So it's discrete statements that we are making about the future. So what would South Africa look like in 2030? So that's just a disclaimer there. Next slide. When we finished, we came up with a list of about 25 variables. This is the DNA of the scenarios or the stories about the future of South Africa. So these are the things that inform or the scaffolding of that future. I'll just mention a few, like for example, number 5, overall inequality will remain entrenched in our country. Number 10, the current social welfare regimes will continue to alleviate poverty. Number 15, female-headed households will become more entrenched. I don't know if you know this, but 50% of our children are raised by their grandmothers, and another 30% raised by their single mothers. So 80% of the next generation is raised by females. So when you look at households data from Stats SA and so on, are we aware that all these households are led by women? And also in terms of now forging a sense of nationhood and values, it's these households that socialize the children. If you look at number 25, I think this is also relevant to today's discussion about how South Africa will benefit from its participation in the BRICS. However, that is also very, very uncertain in terms of this horizon 2030. We can go on to the next slide. So now, these 25 variables, we went and plotted them in terms of their uncertainty and impact. Remember when I started, I said we are operating within a very uncertain landscape politically, socially, economically. So to reduce that uncertainty, we had to plot those. Now, in terms of this matrix, we've got high uncertainty up there and high impact. And we had to then isolate the variables that sit on that top right-hand quadrant there. We can go to the next slide to zoom into that quadrant. Now, these are high impact, high uncertainty variables. I will maybe read out one that could be interesting. We will struggle to absorb low-skilled labor in the industrial sector. Now, this says something about the skills that we are building right now. And we know that our people are unskilled. But in terms of the 4th industrial revolution, they're not going to make it because the jobs are going to be coming from the financial services sector. So high-skilled employment opportunities are going to be the ones that are most prominent. In terms of the state, Mr. Minister, one of the high uncertainty and high impact is that state capacity will remain weak, but we will see action on state-owned entities and state corruption. I'll read another one, which is very interesting. Variable number 8. There will be elite competition and conflict over land, and this will intensify. And what we found there, even though we are dealing with land, and it's so topical right now, but we find that the competition is amongst the elite. You find the traditional leaders, the political leaders, business are the ones who are in that conversation. And that is going to continue, leaving many people behind. Next slide, please. Now, after processing all those variables that we said were high impact and high uncertainty, we settled on what we call key driving forces. Now we're leading to the stories now about our future. But what informs these stories, the drivers to those stories, are social inequality. And when you talk about social inequality, I'm going to unpack that in the next slides, because this is not just about material inequality or income inequality. There's many things that are built in there. There's gender inequality, there's age inequality, there's inequality in terms of access, in terms of spatial planning. There's those who live in the townships, there's those who live in the suburbs. There's also institutional capacity. And again, when we talk about capacity or institutional capacity, people tend to think this is about the state, but the state is not alone. We've seen what's been happening with the labor movement in terms of capacity. We've been seeing what's been happening with civil society, the churches. You know, there's a famous pastor who's been arrested. So it's institutional capacity across the board. We know what's been happening with the KPMGs. We know what's been happening in the private sector. So across our society, every institution is suffering from this capacity issue. I know we like to scapegoat and say the state has no capacity. It's so common, we're so used to saying it, but it's across the board. The last one, which is very interesting, is this one that we refer to as the triple R's. That's a reconciliation, resistance, and resentment. And this is informed by the lack of cohesion in terms of the understanding of our past. We don't agree in terms of where we come from, who benefited, who related, and so gender, and so on. Next slide. Provincial inequality, that's spatial inequality. Gauteng has, you know, in terms of GDP per capita, is well located compared to the Eastern Cape. So there's inequality there. So it's not just about income. We can go on to the next one. Now, in terms of that one, I said that was interesting, the triple R's. This came very strongly amongst the youth, where we are finding resentment. And the resentment is based on age, where young people feel that the older generations sold them out. There's gender and sexuality is another added factor that causes these tensions in our society. Next slide. There's also this notion that the transition was not complete. When we started, the young people were saying there was no transition whatsoever. You all sold us out. But when we debated, we had to settle on agreeing that actually maybe the transition is not complete. Because amongst the leadership group, there were people who were drafters of the Constitution. People were there during the TRC. So there were those debates about, you know, we can't just throw away the Constitution. We can't throw away all our achievements. So much has happened. So we've settled on the incomplete transition. But that leads to this intergenerational woundedness. There's a festering wound that we are carrying and we're passing on to our children. And what does that mean in terms of going forward into the future? So these things that are located there in the triple R's, they actually affect our ability to plan. So I believe that this summit also has to do about planning for the future. But as long as we have that wound, collective wound, we won't be able to plan. We won't be able to strategically plan for the future of our country. And that's why we have all these plans every 5 years, or when the new DG, or when the new minister, or when the new mayor, there's always a new plan because we can't get past, there's something holding us back. We can go to the next slide. Now, in terms of the institute, I've already mentioned that it's across the board. There's corruption in the both public and private sector. There's weak leadership and the generation, you don't have the young people being included. Next slide. I need to start moving on. And there's complete erosion of trust in government, but as you can see, next slide, South Africa is not alone in this. Now, just a recap, we can go to the next slide. The variables were plotted and ranked, and then we got KDFs, but now that brings us to the most interesting part, which is the storylines. So these are the stories of our future. But before we went public with these storylines, we had to test them first. And remember, I mentioned that we spoke to the core participants, 16% of those who are the unemployed. We then tested these storylines that I'm going to give a high-level summary of with public sector, members of civil society, the youth in particular. We had briefings with top eight political parties, with their top structures, you know, entire NECs of the IFP who presented to the ANC Lekgotla, all the DGs and all the ministers, deputy ministers were there, the entire EFF and so on. We made sure that everyone is addressed. We also spoke to the Speaker of Parliament, Chief Justice, and also the presidency, and also engaged with media. Next slide. And after testing those, we had to tweak some of the things that maybe were not consistent, but also to present the scenarios, because they can be so dense and at times a bit depressing. We decided to put in a bit of a creative treatment. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to give you that presentation. We did a brilliant industrial theater piece with professional dancers and actors. You'll be happy as the industry. We filmed those, so usually when I do this presentation, I just click now, and then you'll be watching the dancers and the film. But I'll just give you a high-level summary. But the first story about the future of our country, we call this isiBourgeois. That's an enclave bourgeois nation. And we chose isiBourgeois because it communicates that, isiBourgeois. Next slide. And those who do not know, this is a dance move, very popular some years back. But what we're trying to amplify here is a jumpy nation that's divided, it's frenetic, it's torn apart by deepening social divides. Next slide. As you can see, to try and animate that, We have these Gulf estates, the Steyn cities. If you live in Pretoria, we've got the Midstream estate. They've got a private school, private hospital, private everything within that enclave. However, just on the other side of the wall, there's another enclave, Diepsloot. However, they don't have boom gates. To restrict your access, it will be burning tires. That's their boom gates. And at times, you can't access those spaces. And we see that escalating. And in terms of this Isibujwa enclave nation, we see a society that's even more divided than we are right now. We can go to the next slide. And while these ones in the people in the enclave, they in Steyn City or Midstream, are privatizing, they've got the private hospital, private everything. The poor are also doing their own privatization, but from below, because the state is completely eroded and unable to deliver even the most basic services. So in this, something positive happens though. You find that now people have this sense of self-reliance where they're doing it for themselves. We have a statement or slogan, if you were to watch the videos, where we say, drawn from the Abur Makaplan, we say, the poor Makaplan. So, and you're starting to see this. If you go to the township, you'll see ECD centers, because usually it was the tavern in one street. Now you're starting to see a crash. But in this scenario, by 2030, those early child development centers in the township will eventually attract retired teachers, and they will eventually outperform state or public institutions. We can go on to the next slide. So, 1 minute. Okay, I'll go to the next one. Next one, the next scenario. I won't even give you this high level thing. You'll just go to the website. Next slide. The next storyline is Naila Walk, another dance move. Now, Naila Walk is a dance move that if I'm alone and I'm doing Naila Walk, I'll look a bit mad. But if I have a group of people doing that same dance move, it looks beautiful. And that's the essence of it. It's a nation that's in step with itself. We are all walking together. Next slide. As you can see, this is the demonstration of Naila Walk. But we are all walking collectively together. Next slide. Now, what is a driver to this scenario? You're seeing now there's the State Capture Commission. But eventually, in this scenario, these become, it's not just an inquiry, it becomes trials, state capture trials where people are prosecuted, and that encourages citizens that something is actually being done about the erosion of the state, and so on. Next slide, I need to move fast now. We also see the NDP being revitalized and updated. We see civil society rising up to challenge the state. And this is from the trend of everything was falling. This data must fall, this must fall. And as a result, the governing party or ruling party is forced to comply and respond to all the demands. So the driver here is civil society. And the next one, as you can see, constitutionality is encouraged, and early childhood development programs here are taken seriously. But what is key for this particular platform in terms of education, if you were to read the longer scenarios, education is also another key driver to this. But what helped education is the arts and culture. And this is learned from, again, the Follis movement, where there's utility in terms of the cultural industries in forging a sense of nationhood, a sense of collective identity and values, and so on. Next slide. The last one is Gwara Gwara. And this is a floundering false dawn. We can go to the next slide. Now Gwara Gwara is a dance move that's like, you're caught between immobility and mobility. One leg is standing, is like stiff, and the other one is moving. So again, this is an embodiment of this scenario where we have a highly demoralized land that's also caught in the past, but also unable to quite move forward. Next slide. Now here we see a state that is where there's lawlessness and disorder. Some of the key institutions, especially the state institutions, get recaptured We know we're trying to deal with state capture. They get recaptured in these scenarios. We have municipalities and metros that are running parallel or shadow states, not doing what national is doing. Citizens are completely sidelined. But we also have an NPA that's completely compromised. Next slide. And then you see like protests are becoming more endemic to a point where we have a government that institutes a state of emergency but never wants to call it that. That's how authoritarian it becomes. Next slide. Next slide. But those are the three scenarios. Next. Now in terms of what we're going to be talking about later, I know there's a social compacting, and that's what we're also building towards, but on a national level, not just for a particular industry, but we're also encouraging multiple social compacts at a local level. In June, we're going to be launching a monitoring regime for that across the country, using those 25 variables that are presented. Next slide, before I finish. Now, why are we doing social compacting? Because this is a tool to actually encourage social dialogue, and also it can be an instrument for addressing challenges. There's other countries in South Asian and some few Nordic countries that have gone through a social compacting. I mean, in terms of the Asian countries, I'll mention South Korea and so on, who have, demonstrated success, and that was informed by a social compacting. It's about collectively shared solutions. We've tried that with these summits, and some people have been talking about compacting, but we feel that there needs to be pillars for that social compact. And I'm hoping that today you will identify what those pillars are, but also handle those as a collective pack. Next slide to just show you our website. Please visit our website, SA Scenarios, to go and watch the YouTube videos where you'll get a much nicer presentation with all the videos, with all the monologues and the dances. Thank you.
I think it's a real pity that we had to rush through this presentation, Minister, because it's really given us a very good overview. Thank you so very much. And I hope that people will definitely go to the website. I think for me, probably the same with Charles, was the last 3 slides really spoke to us. And maybe next time that's where we need to think about, because the context is fine and we trust the context. So I'm going to ask the 5 people who are going to speak now to do that Nile dance onto the stage. May I ask you to go down, and then they're going to respond. Minister, you can stay. You don't have, unless you're doing a Nile dance. Are you doing it? Kwara kwara. And because of time, I'm not going to introduce each panelist. I'm actually just going to allow them to speak each for 3 minutes. And then we will open up. If you have any burning questions, we might just take 3 questions or 3 comments. I think this was a very, very rich presentation. These were 2 very rich presentations, so we've had a very rich morning. And so I'm going to start with you, Eric. Are you doing the dance? Which one? Albert, can you sing a song? Can you sing? Can any of the youth sing? What's happening? Come on.
Okay. I wish I could dance. I think what they wanted us to say in 3 minutes is where do festivals fit into this 2030 vision. Rapid Lion is the only one I can really speak about, which is the festival where I work. We've made a few assumptions of our own. And that is that people thought television would kill radio, and it didn't. Then they thought, videos will kill cinema, and it didn't. And now people are thinking digital is going to kill cinema and everything else, and it won't. And the reason it's not going to happen is because people want to stream where they would like to be, and people like to be where they are. You see, you're at the summit. We're streaming through the DEC website. Everybody watching it would like to be here. So humans will always want to congregate, which means the essence never changes. You have to get together. That's why I think Charles's thing said, what will grow our events? Music, it talks to the same thing. You have to give some people something to look at, so you have to gather, you have to get together, and that's what people want to see. And that's where you build your trust to begin with. I just wanted to touch on this, Minister, that you can lock it so that the next minister carries on with what you're doing. I'm sure you're aware of that. So please do lock it before you go. Just put on something there and say, before you finish this, you can't go to the next plan. So thank you for that reminder there. I also wanted to point out that if South Africa is at 177 billion, as Charles said, and Nigeria is at 9.9 billion, what you need to understand is 177 billion rand is $13.2 billion. So you're not that far ahead. And they are at 21% penetration. So what happens when they go to 100% penetration? So we mustn't sit here, I think, and think that we're the most amazing things on planet Earth. Everybody's doing very well. We must just keep doing as well as we can. I think I'm at 2 minutes, I think. So Rapid Lion, Minister, you'll be happy to know that has taken this BRICS thing very seriously. We have a BRICS component in terms of our award ceremony. And the reason we did that is that South Africans can't look into their own bellies. Every time you compete against yourself, you don't improve. Otherwise, the Olympics will only be in Rome, in Greece, whatever. So we thought, let's compete. We can't bring Europe. They have great, you can't bring America. They've got the Globe and Globe, SAG. But we can take some of the best movie-making countries that would like to collaborate. This is important. And let them come and play with us. So we have a BRICS component. Brazil films, Indian films, Chinese films, South African films compete at the Rapid Lion. And on top of that, what's been exciting, we've now joined up with S Filmmaker. Some of you don't know this, but it is a Chinese film platform for entering competition around the world. They are collecting Chinese films to come here. There will be about 15 directors coming this year, so you might want to come and interact with them. From local, I must say I'm very excited about the new crop of filmmakers. I went to Jamil XT Kubega's film, Through the Winter to My Skin. And what I loved there was how he spoke about film. He did not talk like he's arrived, he's the best thing on planet Earth. He quoted like French filmmakers that I didn't know about. He talked about Hitchcock. He talked about this. And I'm pointing this out very specific because as Rapid Lion, we recognize one thing. We Africans did not start the film business. We did not create cinema. And to sit here and think we are the best thing, we can ignore anybody who's done it for over 100 years and reinvent something and it'll make us great, I think is a mistake. Go to those who started this thing, learn from them, get to know what they know before you can reinvent it. It's important. That's why we are bringing Jan Hallen, for example. I'm being serious. He produced Artificial Intelligence. He was Stanley Kubrick's producer, and he's going to be doing three master classes. You know, scripting, it's all in the script, how to make a cheap film, a great film on a low budget. He's doing scripting with music. He's doing something called the calling card. He's here. You'll be one of over 7 billion people to see him. It's the only time we'll be on the African continent. Come to his master classes and see what you can use to make better films. Anyway, what we are saying about Rapid Lion is that, finally, we think, as a festival, our main function is to promote South African films to South Africans. Help South African filmmakers compete with some of the best in the world to make better films. And more importantly, at some point, Minister, we have an exhibition chain where we can immediately take those films there and get every South African in every township to watch it. And this is possible because guys like LK Theaters have already got a blueprint. They just need support from this government in order to move forward. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lala Tuku. I'm the MD of Clive Morris Productions, but this morning I'm standing in the capacity as a co-chairperson for Africa Rising International Film Festival. Thank you for the 2 studies that we've just gone through. That is amazing. And platforms like this hopefully will allow us to talk about our collective wounds that we have. And hopefully it's not going to be just a talk shop, but that we're going to plan, we're going to put deliverables in place. And next year when we look back, we're all going to be proud of each other and of ourselves. We've only got 3 minutes, so I'm going to quickly try and tell you a little bit about my background and Africa Rising International Film Festival. I've been in the creative industry since around the age of 8. I was performing for anyone who cared to watch and pay. My mom was kind enough to allow me to attend the National School of the Arts. After that, when it was time to make a career decision, I really asked her, I said, I've heard about the school AFDA. She looked at the fees, it was really expensive, but she had 3 jobs at the time, single woman raising me, and she put the cents together and I went to AFDA. It was its 2nd year in running, and so there was about a handful of us black students. And I really started enjoying directing. And when I graduated, I went out and I said, I want to direct. And I got a lot of feedback in terms of there aren't black directors, let alone female. So you have a pretty voice, you have a pretty face, start acting, which I enjoyed, and that's what I did. So I acted for a bit, and I was in popular soapies, I presented. And as you go through the journey, some things started, you spoke earlier about that gut feeling, where you are meant to represent a certain character that wasn't authentic. And I was that type of performer that would go knocking in the writer's room and go, sorry, can I just speak about that scene? And when I opened the door, obviously in the writer's room, it was always male and white writing characters that I had to perform. So obviously from an authentic point of view, you'd understand. I was stereotyped into many roles as that tall, slender girl, and narrative, just as I knew narrative was king, there were just moments where it didn't feel right. It came to a point where I walked off set. I was young, I was 22, and as I got into my car driving out of that studio, I didn't know where to go, but I knew I was like, this is probably the end of my career. I drove straight to my grandmother's house and I thought I blew up my career. And the calls that I got thereafter, I'm trying to be quick so I can give you background. The calls that I got thereafter was from industry giants who said to me, you will never work again. You don't walk off set, you do what you're told to do, and you perform what you're meant to perform. Whether the director is going to give you interesting comments about how you have lovely legs or the point that might be, you just perform your script. And that's how I left the world of on-screen television. But I wanted to empower myself. I wanted to be the one making the decisions. I wanted to be in key areas in our film industry where I could use my voice. Long story short, I went to study a whole different other degree. I have, after my film, I've got a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Science, bachelor's degree in Communication Science. But because this is what I believe I was meant to do, I then found my way and started working at the NFVF, took the lowest paying job. But that was really, for me, an amazing thing because it really opened up and really informed me and taught me the real world of filmmaking. But today, as I said to you, I'm standing here as a chairperson of ARIF. So last year in November, the inaugural ARIF Africa Rising International Film Festival was launched, a birth of a new baby that we were so excited about. Our festival director, Mr. Ayanda Sitebe, is here. He's the CEO of Actors Spaces. And for us, there was never an opportune time to start such, Ayanda, everybody's trying to look around. Do you want to just wave? And for us, there was never an opportune time for the African content to be consumed world over. It was clear to us more than ever that the world is watching and studying as we become culture curators. We can safely say that everyone draws inspiration from our diverse cultures, and collaborators travel to see what exactly is our magic. And filmmaking is also at the heart of this movement. We are the custodians of a visual new dawn. Firstly, representation was important to us. The need for African storytellers to be telling their own stories is critical. Our authenticity and our rich history is a voice that we need to mold and articulate more. Our stories, Minister, they hold currency, and together we can trade on their value. A testament that speaks to this is the acquisition of Akin Omotoso's Vaya by international distributor Array, or Catching Feelings and Ingleba, acquired by Netflix. Continentally, films such as Rafiki captured the world stages. All stories, these stories were all stories that were rooted in representing the African experience. We know that film, like any form of art, serve as an important role in society for educating, reflecting social cohesion, and the heartbeat of nations' identity. But they said we need to talk about our wounds. We don't have time to talk about this. But really at the heart of our film festival was women and youth. So we partnered with SWIFT. In 2018, NFVF Gender Matter Study, actually in partnership with SWIFT, showed the very problematic history that women still face in our industry today. We do not have enough female directors or females in key positions. So in this festival, this is what we're trying to do. So we dedicated there was an hour a day where we watched films by females, directed, written, performed, and they came to the panel. The youth came, and they watched these films. A very important project that we started, Minister, was the Arif Film Child, where we bussed 60 students from 6 different schools and townships, and they came to watch these films. Their eyes were this big because it was clear and evident it was the first time they were walking into cinema. From a fourth industrial revolution point of view, we aired 100, Festival Director, help me here, 150 web series content created by the youth. And as we heard about from the PwC outlook, that from a connectivity point of view, that is where we're going. Mr. Stewart, I took the time to read the outlook study about 2 years ago, and it said that South Africa, from a transformation point, from an industry growth point of view, is one of those countries that the industry is moving quite quickly, but transformation lags behind. So the theme of this summit is such a critical one, and we need to put women in the forefront, and we need to listen to our youth and integrate them into the programs. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chipo Jo, and I am the Artistic Director for the Durban International Film Festival. I think I'm actually just going to follow up from where Lala kind of just left off and pick up on a few points that she's actually raised, because I think some of the issues that she's touched on are issues that affect, I think, a lot of the festivals in general, and the education system around the film industry, also similar issues that we're facing. I'm not sure when you went to AFTA, Lala. When was that? Okay, no. No, but what I wanted to comment on was, I'm guessing you said it. Yeah, because I mean, I also attended AFTA, and I think it would probably be about a decade later, and they were also still just. No offense. No. No, it's not an age thing. It's not an age thing. I did things the other way around. I worked in the industry first before I went to film school. So no, it's not like that. And what I wanted to say was that there were also a handful of black students at that time, and there wasn't a lot of transformation in that space. And I remember very well when I was in first year, a few of my friends wanted to do acting, and they did it in the first semester. And by the second year, you had, I think, 2 or 3 black actors left, because none of the directors were writing scripts for black people. And when they did, they were so stereotypical. You had to be a gardener or a maid, and yes, we understand that this is the reality that we come from, but we also have different realities and experiences of the black child that have kind of developed over the years, and more stories, but nobody was writing or telling those stories. So it is an important, I think, summit that we are here, and we're talking about these issues, and we're dealing with these wounds that deeply affect us. The DIF turns 40 this year, so it's a historic year for the Durban International Film Festival, and I think for South Africa as a country. And we're using 2019 to celebrate a legacy of supporting South African and African filmmakers, and our partnership with the global film industry. We're reimagining African cinema as we recognize that DIF is a platform that opens space to discover, birth, seek out, and hear new and established film voices. We celebrate the decolonizing of the embedded canonical film centers globally as we return to the need to find the hidden gems and create a platform where new film voices are discovered and born. I mean, there have always been these cries that you find the same filmmakers getting funded over and over and over again. Where are the younger voices? Where are the the new filmmakers? We want to see, and we want to see these stories, and this is the direction that DIF is taking. And I think, as with every organization, transitional periods, changes, take over a few years to actually finally establish themselves. And I think 40 we'll see quite a few changes that I hope South Africa will enjoy. We are also an Oscar qualifying film festival. So that is to say that in the 40 years that we have been in existence, we have managed to deliver a festival that is recognized on a global and international scale. And we need to be able to use this platform so that our filmmakers get recognized and they get to network internationally without having to leave this country. Because we know getting funding to travel to festivals across the globe is a really difficult thing. At the core of the Durban International Film Festival is development, which is why we have the Durban Film Mart that takes place parallel to the Durban International Film Festival, where we have several programs that are meant to jumpstart, kickstart careers, that are meant to connect projects in development with financiers, with funders. This year we're hoping to bring in distribution into the picture, because we do know that there are films out there that haven't really gone out into the world and haven't been seen or haven't been distributed, and we're hoping that we can tap into that market. The way we see the future of festivals is that we're going to be relying more and more on collaboration between the spaces, the different spaces that work within the platform. So, for example, a couple of years ago, cinema, long format films were made specifically for the big screen. Now they're made for multiple platforms. In order to stay relevant, I think that we're moving in a direction where we're going to have to collaborate with the different partners that work within the space. So for example, you would have a film festival. I think a lot of international film festivals have already started doing that, where they have the festival and people can come through, but they also stream, and they also have all these films being accessed online, which also gives another revenue stream for the filmmakers, which gives the filmmakers broader access, I think my time is up, to a global audience, people that may not necessarily have attended the festival. And we're hoping that also this collaboration will extend to our broadcasters, for example, where they can start a channel during the DIF week and showcase these films so that people who aren't able to make it to Durban can still access the South African films and not then say we've never heard of these films. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Lesego Mpake. I'm the curator for We Africa Film Festival, which is about celebrating Africa Month and regional integration. And I've always wanted to do this. Look the minister in the eyes and say, thank you for your support. Thank you.
I think he's doing a jive, Minister. He's doing a real jive. Wait. You want to come? Okay. Well done, thank you. He saved us 3 minutes. Okay.
All right, I've got a timer here, so I'm going to try and keep to 3 minutes. I'll try. It might be 5. I think it's very interesting that IBFC is the only industry body on this conversation at the moment, and I think I want to thank the organizers for that, for allowing us. Oh, okay, allowing us the opportunity. I'm going to hold it actually. Again, thanks to Rapid Lion, AFIF, DIF, all the film festivals that have allowed us time to actually express ourselves in that space. You know, I go back to my memories of being at NFF and trying to unpack why we went to film festivals, why we supported film festivals. And really, it came down to one thing: audience development. And it's clear that we still have to find a way to get the external audience and stop preaching to ourselves, in a sense, with film festivals, because we find there is a sense of we are the only ones that really go to our film festivals. We have to find a way to market them differently, to bring in more and more of the public into our space. Maybe it's access, maybe it's marketing, but there's something that's missing, that's not quite there. From Charles's conversation, it's very simple. When it comes to cinema and the general public, people like to commune, okay? So this is probably the reason why the rise in, or the steadiness in terms of participation in cinema, it exists, because people like to commune, really and truly. And I think from an African ethos, we love to commune, we like to be around each other. And so that's the reason why with audience development is key in this conversation. We have to commune and kind of express our stories. Again, it goes back to the conversations of PwC reading, and this is where my response comes to PwC, that the consumer is central in this conversation, all right? And we speak about, yes, the consumer has now a choice as to when they watch, but we never really understand, we're not really unpacking the future of how they watch our content when they are watching a particular thing, all right? Yes, there's streaming, there's different genres, there's television, there's series, there's films, but now you are starting to walk into a space, and so we're storytellers of now not focusing on the linear of the story. And what I'm trying to say there is that we are now walking into the vectorized, or the vectorizedness, if that's English, of the story, okay? And this is where Africa will win. African stories, by their nature, are vectorized. If you've ever had a conversation with your grandmother or an elder, and this is where young youth, please pay attention. Yes, there are older people, but please pay attention to this, and this is how you will win. Is the story will go off into another tangent. You're thinking, Maragog, why are you going in that direction? This is simply because the conversation is never linear. It is multiple, it is complex. And this is where I'm saying that in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, because our stories become vectorized, in the sense that there are multiples in the story, you begin to be able to give the world a very African understanding of story. Our stories are not linear. They are multiple, they are layers. Yes, we have in films flashbacks, so you have different spaces to be able to express the world of the protagonist. But now we are saying that you can go into really breaking that world down and building upon it. What it does to the rest of the industry and the value chain, it starts to build digital factories. It starts to expand the actual facilities and how we engage with digitization. Now, coming into Mishra's conversation, it really starts to speak to identity, okay? The identity of African people and the identity of story. We are losing our identity, hence we have all these disparities. Being African is something that we have to really start to unpack and help each other to unpack it, because it starts to obviously feed into what we are passionate about, and that is storytelling. And going into now the discussion of, coming back to the discussion really of film festivals, it is how do we then bring all of this back to the reasons why film festivals exist. It is to showcase our work, yes, but again, just with the DIF strategy, and I think with the Rapid Lion strategy, to be able to showcase it wider. Please, we have to get into an understanding that it is not just about us and us talking to ourselves. With film festivals, we have to find a very different way of speaking to the general public about what we do. South Africa is a Bioscope environment. We love cinema. My aunt had a cinema in Davidson, and my God, when we worked behind those kiosks, we saw the demand of people in general. People love to commune. Allow them to commune, but allow them to commune around our content. Let us find a way to activate film festivals in such that the public are the focus more than just the awards. The awards are great, but let us get our public to engage on our content through film festivals in this era. And again, please expand the story to allow the consumer to decide how to interact with your story. That is where we are going. It's more than just the where, it's more than just the when. It is about the how they are going to dissect your story. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Faith, and I am an African. As we are at the film summit, Brother Minister, I want to start by talking about a film called Come Back Africa. Okay, because I want to just have a moment just to reflect on that film and to reflect on a lady that everybody called Mama Africa, that I call Mazi, that to the young people, that was Miriam Makeba. We are currently in the 10th anniversary of Mazi passing away. And Mazi left this country to promote Lionel Rogerson's film, Come Back Africa. And she never came back. She never came back to this country again until 1990. She left in 1960 to the Venice Film Festival, where Come Back Africa was the first of the successful films to come out of this country and did very well. But that was a film that was made by Americans about ourselves. She became a success, and she changed this country. If you remember, Brother Minister, it was a speech at the United Nations that changed this country at a very, very young age for her. And we are forgetting who she is. It's not 10 years she just died. South Africa is forgetting who she is, but Africa isn't. I'm going to challenge you, Minister, and everybody sitting here, that as the new CEO of the Zanzibar International Film Festival, we're going to dedicate this year to the Pan-African memory of Miriam Makeba. And I would like you, Minister, and the department, and all South Africans to join us during this celebration in Tanzania. And it's very interesting that Mazi left this country to a film festival to promote this country. But Minister, 10 years later, she is being captured by white people in this country. I have her last, I can speak passionately because I'm somebody who worked with her for 30 years. She was like a mother to me. I have her will here, which she made 5 years before she died, which she said in the will done on the 29th of November 2004, that, I quote, "I hereby give, devise, and bequeath my entire estate to Lumumba Zenzili and those are the grandchildren. Till today, those grandchildren are still fighting a white man. Yesterday, we were talking about copyrights. They're still fighting a white man who came into her life a year before she died. Because he's saying he owns the right of Miriam Makeba. The rights of Miriam Makeba is owned by us, Africans, not a white individual. Her will here supersedes everything. So please, I'm begging you, Minister, and I'm begging all black filmmakers, all African filmmakers to never forget Mazi and what she did, not just for South Africa, but for Africa as a whole. Without her, we won't be where we are today. It was after her speech at the UN that the rest of the world took notice and started to boycott South Africa. Please, Minister, I'm begging you. That's my little political speech. But I just want 30 seconds just to say that what we do also need to know is that I always say that I am an African and my African village is Nigeria. We need to learn a lot from the Nollywood experience and the Nollywood success. One of the persons I work with, I'm going to be 64 next month. So at my age, I could tell it like it is. And one of the things that one of my greatest friend ever said was Fela Kuti. And Fela say, Faith, I know the fit sell record for London or for Europe. I don't need it. He said, because my people love me. What I'm trying to say, as Africans, as South Africans, we need to love our stories. If we love our stories, it means that we're going to be watching our stories all the time. And that is, we do a lot of things. When we started Nollywood in 1999, I was the one, as the head of a broadcasting network, Minaj International, made history by showing Nollywood to the whole world because we have a partnership with Sky, BSP, and Thomson Cable in the US. We were showing Nollywood back to back from midnight to 6 a.m. in the morning. And at that time, yes, that time, Mnet came to me and said to me, why am I showing this rubbish? And I said to them, it's our rubbish. And one thing that I also said to them, don't worry, okay? Quality will come out of quantity. There are so many Nollywood films being made that they start to get better. But on behold, within a year of the success of that, the taxi drivers in London, in New York, we're talking about Nollywood. Did you know what Mnet came up with? They came up with African Magic. So they're criticizing me for showing Nollywood. Now they came up with African Magic. I don't know how many African Magic network are on Mnet as we speak. So that they will never give credit to us for starting it. Not even in Nigeria. In Nigeria, the same Mnet did not have African Magic Yoruba, African Magic Hausa, African Magic Igbo. We have over 100 languages. By the end of this century, I'm sure there's going to be 100 African Magic channels in Nigeria. All I'm saying is that as Africans, we love ourselves. Let's support our filmmakers and let's support our story. Thank you very much.
I think we went from the dance to probably the song, Faith Hausa. I've been told that we don't have much time. In fact, we have no time. Our time is up. So I'm just going to quote our president when he says, we see a country that has embraced the benefits of technology for economic growth, social development, and for more effective governance. We are producers of knowledge and drivers of technological progress. I think it's a good way to think about our sector. We are really producers of knowledge. We can say it is in our hands, as Tata Madiba said to us. It is up to us to take it to the next level. Minister, we'd like to thank you very, very much for being with us throughout these 2 days. And this shows your commitment. We know your commitment. We've traveled with you. We've seen you. We know that you're committed to the sector, and we are really grateful. Sis Lindy, I was going to call you on the spot. They said I'm not allowed to call anybody. But I would like to, on behalf of, I think, our sector, thank you, because you are really one of the people whom we know since 1994. You have been there. You've been with us. You are really the embodiment. You house our sector, and we want to really thank you, really. I know it's not the end and it's not the moment for thank yous, so I'd like to thank the rest of you for your time. And I think it's the tea break now. Libone, Dr. Sitole, right? Do we come back? Or are we going to commissions? Somebody else going to speak? Housekeeping? Some commissions. Okay. So we break into our commissions, the same rooms. Take your cup of tea, and hopefully there's an apple with it today, or a bun. And then, thank you.